Do we start Mitch Keller next week after his latest blowup? Find out next on Fantasy Baseball Today in 5. Welcome into FBT in 5 on Friday, August 4th. I am Frank Stanfield, joined by Scott White, and let's preview Week 20. The schedule for next week: 3 teams with 5 games, the D-backs, Mariners, and Cardinals; 15 teams with 6 games, 11 teams with 7 games, and the rare team with 8 games next week, your Atlanta Braves. Start or sit these 2-star pitchers. Scott, Dylan Cease coming off a terrible outing. He is facing the Yankees and the Brewers.
Yeah, one terrible outing, and the one prior to that wasn't so great either. But I think you need more of a rough patch than that to sit a pitcher of his caliber in a 2-star week, especially when the matchups are as good as these.
Mitch Keller is on a rough stretch right now, and he is facing the Braves and the Reds. What do we do?
So to put numbers on it, his last 4 starts at 9.97 ERA, a 1.98 WHIP, really bad stuff. And so I think under normal circumstances, be easy to just say sit Mitch Keller. And in fact, in the shallowest leagues, you might even be thinking about dropping him at this point, which is fair. But yeah, it's complicated by the fact he's making 2 starts this week. And I think at least in points leagues, not at all in categories leagues, way too risky for that, but at least in points leagues where you're more inclined to maximize volume, if you have a bad pitching staff already and you have to be extra conscientious about maximizing your number of starts every week, you might still be inclined to start Keller. I'm not promising it's going to go well, but it might be the best you could do in that specific scenario.
Tony Gonsolin at the Padres and home against the Rockies.
Yeah, he's been pretty bad this year. His last start was good, but it was short. Most of his starts have been short. I think those matchups are good enough, though, that at least in points leagues, you could run Gonsolin out there.
Gavin Williams facing the Blue Jays and at Tampa Bay.
It just hasn't been good enough, I think, to justify it, particularly with those matchups.
Braxton Garrett at the Reds and home against the Yankees.
I'm out on him, too.
And Hyunjin Ryu at the Guardians and home against the Cubs.
Definitely out on him.
All right, let's talk about 2-star pitchers that you are not out on. These are 7 names to add and stream for next week. Who are they?
Okay, so Seth Lugo, he's been awesome of late. I mean, really all season. Missed some time with injuries, but the season numbers look great. Matchups are kind of tough going against the Dodgers and then at the Diamondbacks, but I think it's a real solid skill set that generates ground balls, limits walks. I think he's fine to use in a 2-star week. One of the most under-rostered pitchers is Seth Lugo. Ranger Suarez, awesome matchups this week against the Nationals, especially against the Twins. They're terrible against lefties. Grayson Rodriguez, he's looked better since returning from the minors. Hasn't really had an amazing start yet, but it feels like it's right around the corner. It goes against the Astros and then at the Mariners. Cutter Crawford, 3 of his last 4 starts have been good, and you can't ask for better matchups than the Royals and the Tigers, which is who he gets this week. Josiah Gray and Mackenzie Gore, teammates, obviously. They had bipolar matchups at Philadelphia, but then against the Athletics. They're both pretty volatile, but if you're looking for volume, I think that Oakland matchup especially makes them okay choices. Oh, and one more, the really deep choice, Cole Reagans, who joined the Royals rotation after Ryan Yarbrough got moved at the deadline and looked great with kind of a tweaked arsenal, a slower slider instead of the cutter he had been relying on before, and generated some weak swings from the Mets lineup. So he's at Boston against the Cardinals this week, 96% available. If you want to go deep, Reagans is a fine choice.
And if you're looking for single-star streamers next week, Kenta Maeda, 78% rostered at the Tigers. Nick Pivetta, 62% rostered facing the Royals. And Andrew Heaney with a great matchup at the Giants. They have struggled big time against lefties this season. Let's slide over to the hitters. Best matchups for next week. The Atlanta Braves with those 8 games, followed by the Red Sox, Dodgers, Phillies, and Brewers. The worst hitter matchups, D-backs, Mariners, Orioles, Angels, and the White Sox. With that being said, Scott, your favorite sleeper hitters for week number 20.
From that Braves lineup, and the Braves, by the way, in their 8 games, Pirates rotation for 4, Mets rotation that has been torn up at the deadline for 4. So Marcell Ozuna is a must. He's only 61% rostered. I think Orlando Arcia is a fine choice too. Limited by batting low in the lineup, but he's going to get extra volume this week with those 8 games. So that should make up for it. I don't have him in my top 10, but Eddie Rosario as well, worth pointing out, since 7 of the 8 games for the Braves are against righties. Also, some really hot hitters who have good enough matchups that you'll want to stick with them include Brandon Lau, only one lefty on the schedule, Chas McCormick, Jarren Duran, and Tristan Casas. They have the second best matchups. Their matchups are more than just pretty good, and they've been hot. 3 lefties on the schedule, so they may not play as much as usual, but again, the matchups are good enough. They've been hot enough that I think Jarren Duran, and Tristan Casas are definitely worth using. Also, Jake Berger. He has crushed lefties this year, especially, and the Marlins are facing 3 of those this week. Not a bad time to use him.
All right, we're going to wrap there. For more extensive fantasy baseball coverage, listen to the Fantasy Baseball Today podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the Audacy app, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Thanks for listening to Fantasy Baseball Today in 5, and we'll be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.